This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Adam Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic preamp into the Empirical Labs EL8X distressor mixed through Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Adam Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show, and we really appreciate it. Now, get ready to rock.
Correct, as like an AI program would say, is not going to work for all styles. I think particularly to a couple years ago when Billie Eilish's Where Do We Go When We Fall Asleep record came out, that record, according to audio whatever, is horrible. There's way too much low end. It's dark, it's distorted, it's way too smashed, but it's perfect. Like, that record sounds amazing, but on paper, it is wrong.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Adam Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin by unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White A4V and A7V, available for a limited time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Are you struggling to make your mixes sound professional? If your tracks feel weak, distant, or lack punch and clarity, I've got the perfect solution. My free course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will teach you how to achieve pro-level mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. But these techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you use Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or another. If you're ready to make your best record ever, go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now for free. Find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Daniel Bacigalupi. Oh, I didn't forget. I never said it out loud.
It's true. We didn't review it.
Right?
Exactly.
That's what I thought, man. That's what I thought.
Yep.
But then I looked at it and it was like such a powerful word.
It's a lot of letters that come at you real fast.
Daniel is a Minnesota native who has been mastering music in Nashville for 15 years. He began his career at Ithaca College in New York, where he earned a BM, Bachelor's of Music and Sound Recording Technology, under the direction of Alex Perialas, if I said that right.
Correct.
Upon graduation, he moved to Nashville and began a 6-year career at Georgetown Masters with renowned mastering engineer Andrew Mendelson. We were just talking to Bobby Heel, who was talking about being there as well.
Dear friend of mine. Love Bobby. She's
That's
great.
Awesome. Daniel opened DB Masters in Green Hills in 2014 before teaming up with Grammy Award-winning engineer Pete Lyman at Infrasonic Mastering. He now works out of Infrasonic Nashville and continues to work on projects across a variety of genres. Daniel has mastered for a range of artists, including Gabby, Barrett, Darius, Rucker, Parker Millsap, Parmalee, Kane Brown, Levi, Hummon or Hummon. Is that how I said it?
Hummon, I believe.
Hummon,
Is how
okay,
said
cool. Ross Copperman, Republican Hair, Ginny Owens, Hey Romeo, Here Come the Mummies. That's just a great band too. Phoebe Hunt, and many, many more. Thank you to Raylan Janicki, Efried Shippen, and Pete Lyman for making our introduction. Make sure we got connected and got Daniel over here for an interview. Please welcome Daniel Bacigalupi to Recording Studio Rockstars. Daniel, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am. Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you here, man. I guess we have, crossed paths when I've been over at Infrasonic before.
Many times,
walking
many
down
a
the
party.
hallways, many a party.
Yep.
And I've seen you at NAMM and stuff like that too.
Correct.
Back when the big parties were happening.
I know. I don't know if you heard about what happened this last year.
There was some confiscation.
There was, the popo came and shut us down,
Man, it's just like being back in like high school or something.
It really was. It was pretty great though. It was almost more fun that way. Good story to tell.
Yeah, it's a good party when the authorities come and tell you you're having too much fun.
Exactly.
I think, and I think they confiscated your alcohol or something.
They did, unfortunately.
Yeah, our theory was that they were back on the loading dock.
Oh, I'm sure.
Getting
I'm
loaded, literally.
Almost certainly, but we were able to still find some booze and sneak them in, so we were all good.
That was in anybody listening. We're talking about 2003 NAMM officials. In case you're listening in right now, yeah, not recently. No, just kidding.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
I was not. I was like, I'm pretty sure it was 2024. No, never mind. What did I say? Sorry, just kidding. Cut that.
All right, cool, man. So, give us a little bit of background on you, man. So, I don't know a whole lot about you except that you have a really cool last name.
Sure. I grew up in rural Minnesota, about 70 miles north of the Twin Cities, in the middle of nowhere, in a town of about 3,000 people called Pine City. Place with more pines than people, for sure. And had a kind of a unique situation growing up. My dad was the band director at the high school and the elementary school. And he also did like pep band and then gave piano lessons. He was an instrument repair person and a piano tuner. So I was surrounded by that kind of environment from a really young age. And I remember sitting with him, at someone's house while he's tuning a piano, listening to like the same note, like dong, dong, over and over and over again. And I think that actually kind of got me interested a lot into like just being aware of sound and listening to it. And I wasn't involved. I was just hanging out. But it was just getting into that kind of like listening environment from a very young age, I think kind of always got me into the way things sounded. I also was always really sensitive as a kid to sounds. A lot of them would really bother me, or I'd really like them. It was kind of a weird thing. So when I was getting a little bit older, about 12 years old, I decided, well, I need to play guitar because all the cool kids play guitar. And it was actually at that time I had rented from my local library Nirvana's Nevermind, and was like, this is, how did I not know what this was?
Rented from the local library.
Yep. It was pretty great.
Not really renting, borrowed.
I guess. Rent. Yeah, exactly.
Checked out.
There was checked out. That's the word. Yeah. So I remember my mom brought it home and she had picked it up and she was a little questioning it at the time, but no, it was all good. And I fell in love with guitar from then. And so then I went to my dad, he's also a guitar player, and was like, well, how do I do this? And so started getting obsessed with that at kind of like 12, 13. And my father was always really into recording himself, but had never like done it himself. He was just fascinated by the process, or had like small tape recorders growing up. And so when he saw me getting into it, he was like, well, maybe we should look more into this. And we had a buddy of his who had some knowledge of recording. So we went to him and got a Motu 828 and an old G3 computer and Digital Performer 4.
Oh, I love it. An old G3
An old computer. G3, right. Exactly. So
at this point, you're
like 13.
You are checking out tape, but
we had a task
Pro Tools was already here, right?
Pro Tools was here, but definitely not accessible by me. That was at the time when it was either LE with an M box, or you needed to use like their specific hardware to get the HD.
So you didn't get the Digio one with the 16 inputs?
I didn't, because the Motu, we had an 828 that had 8 in, and that was pretty much the most that was the most number of inputs I could have, but it wouldn't work with Pro Tools, unfortunately.
Right.
The time.
It wasn't, they hadn't opened it up to
exactly.
that yet. And was it a Motu that had 8 mic pre's, so you could just plug the mic right in?
It had 2 mic pre's. So this was also part of the fun, was figuring all this out. So it had 2 mic pre's that I could use, and then 6 direct ins. So we had a Mackie 16-channel mixer that I used the mic pre's from, and then would use direct outs from each of those channels into the 828.
Isn't it funny that at that time you might have thought that the Mackie line-ins was maybe a compromise, but like now in hindsight, you might think
100%.
that was totally where the sound was.
Oh yeah, 100%. And especially now listening back to, we still have that converter, and it sounds so bad. Like, I mean, I don't mean, sorry, Motu, but the leap that converters have gone through in the last 20 years is just absolutely astounding.
I know. It's so funny though, because digital technology has so vastly improved, and it's like a high-res digital photo of sounds now.
Yes.
Whereas it used to be like a crappy disposable camera or something.
100%.
And then we get all this high-res stuff, and then the first thing we want plugins that make it sound like an old crappy camera again.
Yep.
Right? And upstairs, when I was showing you the studio, I was like, this is sort of like the space where I'm trying to set it up for writing. Well, I took the same thing. I took an old Mackie console, and I've just got all the mics that I might want to use up there running to the console.
It's perfect.
And then my next thinking is like, okay, well, I'll just take the output of this console and plug it into, that'll be the input to whatever I'm going to record on. And I just, mute or unmute, and there's the sound. And it's such a great way to work. And
it is a good way to work.
Like this, and you end up with this cool quality to the tones that you don't have when you just go sort of the pure way in.
100%. 100%. And I also think that using gear that is somewhat limiting is a lot of times really beneficial to your creative process, right? Because all of a sudden there's just less options. Sometimes I think, especially someone like me, gets a little bit of option paralysis, where I prefer to almost be stuck in a lane a little bit. So that way there's like a clear direction or like a focus that we're going for. And I think working with gear specifically is very helpful for that. I still do hybrid mastering. The way I almost always work is still a loop through an analog chain, and then capture, and then do a little more digital processing with it there too.
Okay.
But I love the gear, the aesthetic feeling of turning a knob, feeling, hearing relays click in and out. It doesn't do anything, I don't think necessarily that's essential for the sound, but for me, it really helps with my workflow and making it happen.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I like having digital controllers just so that I can have the feel of turning knobs when I'm EQing something, making different, feel like you make physical choices instead of mental choices.
Yeah, I totally know what that means. Yeah, 100%.
So let's stay at the fun part at the beginning too. So you're playing guitar and you're like setting up your studio, and you said you were dabbling in some taped stuff too, or no?
So before we got Digital Performer and the Motu, my dad did have a 4-track Tascam. It was like the small cassette tape. It wasn't like a real tape machine, but it was those little 4-track, I don't even know what they were called, but these little Tascam cassettes. And that was what I had started on, and had kind of learned a little bit, kind of Beatlesing it myself, where I'd like record one track onto this one and of a guitar, and then transfer that over here, because the way it worked, I had to like it was really ridiculous. But yeah, so I would have to essentially like record one track, bounce that one off to another track, maybe record stereo, and then bounce that one down to mono.
The ultimate form of commitment.
Exactly.
And actually a great way to get cool sounds. I mean,
it was.
Like, it'd be hard to mimic the murkiness of 4 bounces, 5 bounces now.
100%.
With plugins or something.
Yep.
But that really was the sound of song demos, at that point. I mean, why even call them demos, of the recordings we would make, is like, there's this sort of ghostly version of something that started early in the recording.
100%. 100%. And it also gets this kind of nice, the way I always thought of it was like, lo-fi recordings to me are like Polaroids. They're like, they have that warm kind of, they get the feeling of the moment really well without giving you the tiny little details of the moment, if that makes sense. But that's kind of how I've always viewed that kind of analog process, especially with sort of, I wouldn't say inferior, but you know what I mean, gear, having to use that gear in ways that make it really creative and sound really cool, that you might not be able to do as easily with something like a super great converter in Pro Tools.
Right. Well, so one of the things that I remember digging about my 4-track was just the fact that it distorted.
Yeah.
Like the inputs just crunched out in
all
a
the
cool
time.
way that made you go like, that's a cool sound.
Yep. And it doesn't have that.
You didn't go like if you
sound.
see a red thing, a red over in the digital world, you kind of get worried. in 4-track cassette world, you're just like, that sounds cool.
Exactly.
Sounds loud and hot on there. It, like drums would sound crunchy and distorted.
Yeah, it just that sort of natural limiting of just gain with not a ton of headroom, gear, with not a ton of headroom, is something kind of magical, honestly.
Yeah, and then having the EQ there, you can kind of sculpt a little bit lows and highs.
I think I just had like low, mid, high, but I don't think I had any like selecting anything.
That's 3 good ones right there.
Yep, exactly.
So the thing I didn't like about my 4-track was I couldn't figure out how to punch in.
I never did that either.
But then I was also like, how would I even do it if I'm playing an instrument? How am I going to punch in while I'm doing it?
That's a good point. Yeah, I guess I had never really done any sort of punching. For me, it was always like use one track and then try to get it over to another one.
Sometimes I think some of the multi-track cassette recorders and for like Pro Tools and stuff like that, Digio 1 would have a foot switch input, so you could use a foot switch for punching in and out.
Oh, that's clever.
Which is really clever, and I haven't seen that again.
I've never heard of that.
Seems to never have come back.
But it seems really obvious. Like, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, in fact, God, that would be such a time saver probably to be able to do that when you're recording your own vocals or guitar in the studio. It might be a little weird to have to, foot stomp in the middle of a vocal.
But if we might be onto something here, though. We should market this later.
We'll make a little box.
Who's sponsoring the episode that could make
a little MIDI box?
I like
punch
it.
In.
That'd be great.
The punching bag or something like that.
That'd be really fun. That's interesting, huh?
So I'll pivot a little bit when I'm writing and I want to just be in a state of flow and not have to think about the engineering part. Probably not supposed to talk about this so much because it's a discontinued thing, but Isotope made a cool little battery-powered box called the Spire.
Oh yeah, I remember this.
And you can integrate it with your phone and stuff. But what was so great about it to me that I'd love to see, be studied by any DAW or this feature is you'd go up to the point at which you messed up your vocals and then you just hit stop. And then without doing anything else, all you have to do is hit the record button and it automatically rewinds a little bit, plays up to that point, drops into record and just keeps going.
Wow. So you select the edits point first, hit stop.
Yeah,
that's where it'll do it.
Stop right here. You just go right here, hit the record button. It does all that. And so it never busted my flow when I was trying to keep my head in the lyric or the sound of my voice or playing a guitar part or a bass part, God forbid, where I'm bass is already so hard enough,
That's
so
wild.
and I really love that. And one of the things I hate about recording yourself in our studios is how often the studio's like, hey, can you just become the engineer again? Put your engineering hat back on for a moment. And you learn that when you're writing and creating songs, even that little bit of an ask, hey, can you just hit 4 buttons and program the pre-roll and
that can get you out of
select your punch out point, you're done. Yeah, you've lost your
the creative.
Do you feel the same thing in mastering? Does that happen?
That's an interesting question. Because I haven't really made much music in a very long time. Definitely have some residual trauma from exactly the kinds of things you're talking about. But in the mastering world, I think I've been able to now get my sort of my flow and setup in a way where I've worked really hard to get a lot of those kinds of kinks out of the system. And one of the big ways is by a lot of prep in setting up a session. So when I first get started on a session, I don't just throw in a WAV file and start going on it. I, especially if it's a record, I will lay out the whole record first, get all the mixes, generally topped and tailed, clean up the beginnings and the ends. So they have clean starts and stops, space the whole thing. And I've kind of got the shell of the album already completely set up when I start actually EQing the songs. And so I essentially take all that technical stuff and all that kind of what I would say less fun part of audio, and I get that out of the way first.
Right.
Then go through a creative step of mastering the songs sonically and getting them all back into my DAW and then lining them up with the originals. And then it goes back to a technical again at the end to get rid of any pops, clicks, export all the specific file types. If we need to get down to 16-bit or different sample rate, all that stuff. So I kind of do a technical brain, artistic brain, technical brain, and try to keep them separate as much as possible.
Dig it. That makes sense. Yeah. So you're arranging all the songs in the right order. You're making sure maybe that they have generally the matched volume level.
Correct. I don't even really do that too much at the very beginning, but yes, that would be, if there was, especially if one song is like very quiet compared to another or very loud, I will give them a quick leveling too, because sometimes when you're making those choices of, like, for example, how much space to put between tracks, the volume's going to affect how that sounds to you. Or a fade out might sound like it fades out early before the song is mastered.
Right, but once you turn it up louder,
10 dB now, then you're like, oh, that fade is still happening. So there is a little bit, I have a few tricks to try to prevent things like that from happening, because that does happen. But always at the end too, the way I work is I don't bake any of my like fades or tops and tails into the files I print. So I set up the record, and then generally what I do is actually when I record a song through my chain, I undo the fade, record it through, and then redo the fade on my printed version. That way, if the artist is ever like, can we have the fade a little longer? I haven't lost that information.
That's smart, right? Yeah, save enough
so I don't have to run
content so that you can adjust the fade later.
Exactly.
But then also, I don't know whether this is relevant or not, but the noise that comes in analog world, if that's even a thing, gets faded out when you're refading it too.
Correct. That is
pushing
definitely
it down
a
into
thing.
the noise floor.
I've worked really hard to have a very clean chain, so there's not a ton of noise just in the actual loop. But yes, it is definitely important. I get this all the time from mix engineers who have clearly done a fade on the audio but left their console on, and there's just like, shh happening, and there's no way to fade that out naturally without it feeling like you heard a bunch of console noise. Or you have to shorten the fade enough that the fade feels weird, right? If you can also just get the fade out before the console noise is at a level where it overpowers the fade, but then your fade is going to be short. So, yeah,
it makes sense. Like why the fade goes last, because if you faded the file and then ran it out through Gear and recorded it back in, now you have another hard ending to the thing that you have to fade again.
Yep, your noise floor essentially becomes part of it. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. Why you need to fade once?
Yeah, exactly.
Fade well.
Exactly. And at the end.
Don't be Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Is there a Darth Vader in your studio? Have you ever seen a Darth Vader?
So we used to have a computer at Georgetown that was called Darth Vader because it was all black. Like the case was all black.
Darth Vader or Darth Vader?
Oh, Darth Vader. I misheard you.
That's all right.
Well, we did have a Darth Vader. I've never seen a Darth Vader.
I have a Darth Vader coffee cup in the studio. And because he's a bad guy, we'd always make it the cup that the espresso machine sort of, when you start it up, it sort of pees a little bit.
It does its first thing,
Yeah, it's his first thing. So that's what Darth's job
Darth
was.
Vader. That's funny. That's funny. I've never heard Darth Vader. That's really funny.
Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make sure every episode of this podcast sounds great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from Isotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at isotope.com. All right, cool. So tell us more about your studio. You started out doing the music thing. You ended up going through mastering. Actually, maybe before you tell us about your studio, do you want to talk about some of your experiences early on in mastering studios like Georgetown, for example?
Well, yeah. So where it all actually got started for me was in college. I was at Ithaca College in upstate New York, and as part of the degree,
where Cornell is too, right?
Yes, exactly. It's in the same city. They actually are both up on these two hills that overlook the town and this lake. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you ever end up in upstate New York, it's worth it to go to Ithaca just to see waterfalls and hang out. But I was up there, and there was the program there was like definitely not mastering. There was not really a mastering component to the audio program. It was still, this is 2008. So it's still kind of a dark art, if you will, in that a lot of the secrets weren't out there. There wasn't really like the internet presence that there is now with this kind of information. And a lot of it was like software and gear that a lot of people didn't have. You still had to use specific DAWs for mastering that a lot of people weren't aware of. So it was definitely this hidden kind of dark area of the music industry. But my professor at the time, Alex Perialas, he's an awesome engineer. He's a really cool guy and has helped me. I owe him a lot, almost everything for this career. But he was really good friends with Tom Coyne at Sterling Sound. And they were had been friends for years. And Alex kind of hooked me up with Sterling my junior year. So this has been like 2007. And I went for a summer and got to hang out with Tom Coyne at Sterling.
And that was New York Sterling?
It was New York Sterling, correct. That was the only one at that time.
Right, and that was the one where you guys had a whole floor on the west side,
yes, right? It was up in the Chelsea market in Chelsea, and it was the coolest studio.
It really was. I got to do one record there, and it was a cool space. Like you come in, and it's like all the studios sort of have windows to look out.
The glass doors and walls, yeah.
Yeah, but then the center was like a big lounge area, and
correct.
You guys had awesome bagels.
It was, every day they would have food would come in, the fridge would get stocked. It was amazing. And there was all these great restaurants underneath it too. Like it was unbelievable. And Ted Jensen's room looked over the Statue of Liberty. That was wild. So yeah, it was a really neat place, but that was my first experience into the real world of what mastering was. And it was also like a real shock of how little I knew. Because on my first or second week there was actually this story. Tom was out of the studio and I was there. I was the only person from his part of the studio there. And a call came in and someone rushed into the room and said, okay, I need you to talk to this person. They're an A&R at a label. And I need you to find out what they need. And I need you to not tell them you're an intern. And I was like, okay. So I talked on the phone to this label person and she said, I need an exabyte of something. And I just wrote it down.
I'm sorry, is that a skin
exactly.
issue problem or something?
I was like, is this music? What are we doing? So I just wrote down exabyte and went out into the studio and asked someone and they laughed at me like I'm such an idiot for not knowing. But we got to figure it out, right? An exabyte is this type of digital tape that we used to store DDPs on, or that's essentially the file that becomes a CD eventually. And that was how masters were actually physically stored on these digital, they look like little DAT tapes, but they were data, not audio. And that was my introduction to that. And now from there, I started researching that. And then I realized, I don't know what a 1630 is. I don't know what, there's all these things about the mastering world that I didn't even know existed. Didn't know what a DDP was. I think that one still, a lot of people don't know.
I'm still trying to figure that one out. And I'm not even sure if it matters anymore.
Well, the only reason it matters is if you're making CDs, but you're right. If you're not, it is definitely not essential.
Well, playing back a DDP through a DDP player means you're going to hear the exact intended spacing between songs.
That is correct.
Right?
Yes, you get
and levels.
Yep, you get the spacing, the levels, and the downsides though are it's only 44/116. That's the only thing that they can be. And they are kind of cumbersome to work with. You don't have all of the WAV files. The file set is like a data file and then these two other little data files, and they together give all the information needed to make the audio. So you still need a DDP player, and then you can use that to extract audio from. But it's not the most easy to use format. But the reason it's used is that it will not work if anything has happened to the file. So if you take a DDP and you send it to a plant and a bit has been lost or something has gotten corrupted, the file runs a checksum and will spit an error and just will not work and will say, this file's not complete, don't use it.
Okay, great. So that is hugely helpful when you're doing quality control. And
exactly.
And you're listening through to make sure everything's right. And I think I was asking Bobby about that, which was sometimes you wonder, every time, if I take one more breath in the studio, do I need to recheck the thing again? It's
yes.
This question of when can you be done?
Exactly. And really the true answer to that is everything should be quality checked so often. like really, if you want to do it right, let's say we're making a record and they have a set of HD masters, a set of, which are 24-bit masters that's what we call them as HD masters, a set of mastered for iTunes files, and 1644 ones. Really, you could theoretically say, well, I made the 1644 ones from the other files, so I should only need to QC that. And if those are good, everything's good. But you really don't know that maybe a file there was an error when it got uploaded to the website. Maybe there was an error when it moved from one drive to another. Like technically,
That's
even
what's so
moving
scary
a file,
about it.
right, it means you should re-QC it. But in the real world today, that's just not practical. That's all we would be doing is listening to files to make sure there's no problems. And computers have gotten so good that in general, the way that I do it now is if we start with a 24-bit thing, I will like QC that. If there's other 24-bit things after that, I will do null tests of those to the original, and make sure that there's no problem.
Yeah, let's explain a null test for the rock stars who maybe have heard that, but they're not sure how you do it.
So basically, if you take an audio file and you duplicate it, and then you flip the polarity of one of them. In other words, another word would be phase, people use. But essentially, every time a waveform was moving up, it's now moving down. You're just completely inverting what the electrical signal was originally given to the converter. And what that means is when you play two audio files together, they just sum. The way it works is that those signals get added together. And so if we have something that's at like +1 and -1, and we add those together, we now get 0. So theoretically, if you have one audio file and another audio file completely out of polarity or phase with each other, and you play them, you should get no sound at all. And that works. That is how it happens in your DAW. So what I do is I take the first bit of the record that I've already listened down to and put that in there. Then I take the second file. Maybe it's specific for something else. But the second file you put in under it, flip the polarity, and then I bounce the whole thing. And I should end up with a blank wave file. And if I look at that wave file and see any information in it, then I know there's a problem. Something there is different between these two files.
Right, exactly. That represents the difference between those two files. So,
Correct.
So it might be...
So it's very easy to find mistakes and pops using that because they jump right out of this like completely blank waveform.
Cool.
So that's kind of my way. I've done a lot of it now. But still the best is still a listen. And on records where there's a lot of pressure or like it has to be done and there's no wiggle room, I'll still listen down to every single thing just to be 100% sure.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So yeah, my first thought when you were describing the null test, you say you flip them, mix them together and then bounce it out and look for a visual indicator.
Right.
My first question might have been like, well, are you going to see like subtle little things? But I think the point you're making is when there is a difference, it's usually enough that it's not a subtle thing and it looks like it's usually a spike or something
correct.
like that.
And
because
so,
it might have been a pop in the first place anyway.
Exactly. And you're right, though. One part of the step I didn't say is after doing that bounce, I make the waveforms enormous. You just in the DAW grow the waveforms to the point where I can actually see the dither. If there's dither, I can see the dither. But any mistakes, like you said, pop out immediately from that. So
yeah, because if you listen to it, you'd be listening down with the speakers cranked or something, which would be a bummer when the pop comes through.
Exactly, right. And that's always a little terrifying too. So yeah, I found this way though works the best. Also, it comes in handy. I think people could use this more often. Just in like, let's say we mastered a record 3 years ago, and you have a bunch of files, and you're like, I can't remember if these are the ones that were approved. Are these the final ones? Well, you could just send them to me, and I could do this really quick test, and I would say, yep, these match the files that we gave you last, even if you renamed them or did something like that.
Right. What if you renamed them, but they're the same files? But what if they accidentally got like converted to MP3 or MP4 and then back to WAV again?
It won't work, unfortunately.
You would notice.
We definitely would notice.
Right.
We would absolutely notice. That's another good way of, that's a good way of quality checking it too. You can also, there's a lot of tricks for that one. You can put a WAV file into RX, and RX, if you've used it a lot, you'll know what MP3s look like in RX, and you can see that even though this says it's a WAV, it was clearly an MP3 first, and then
it has to do with like the high frequenes being truncated.
Correct.
Or something like that.
Yep, you'll start to see these weird squares in the high frequency. Like it almost looks like a digital, like a pixelated version of what the WAV file looks like. The WAV file looks like a smooth kind of, if you know RX, it's got like this kind of color scheme to show intensity. And if it's a smooth WAV file, it's just a nice, very clear kind of color scheme. But if it's an MP3, they show up as these little like cubes almost.
That sounds kind of cool. It sounds sort of cool. Vintagey and desirable.
I mean, exactly. Oops.
All right, dig it. So let's talk about the things that could fool you when you do a null test, though. Maybe they don't happen in the mastering stage because the final mix is the final mix. But when somebody sends you another version of a final mix, or you print two different mixes, I'll fill in the blanks too in case this sounds like a loaded question. But when there are plugins in your mix, when you're thinking, well, this is the same mix, I just bounced it out twice, it should be the same thing. There are some plugins and processing that go on that might be randomized and time delayed and things like that. Like you might have a flanger effect or a phaser effect that, cycles slightly differently each time. Or you could have reverb,
yes,
which has got randomized stuff going on. And in those cases, if you bounce two mixes with the same that you thought were going to be identical, they might not null test because there's a difference in those reverbs.
That is absolutely true. And you see that a lot with convolution reverbs and a lot of the new UAD and plugin alliance stuff that has the analog randomization in it.
Right.
And there is no way around that. I would say the test for me with the polarity test, I really don't read too much into them other than these files are identical or these files aren't. And it's almost always a situation where I'm looking for one of those two scenarios. Right. So I don't, we don't deal with that too much. The only time I would use it though, is let's say we got a mix and then I got a revised mix that sounded very similar, right? So I'm not sure what the difference is between these two, but the artist has claimed there's something. If I do the null test there, I will get a lot of convolution reverb sounds in there. I'll get a lot of that extra noise, like you were saying, that isn't the same on both files because of the randomization. But those will generally be very consistent sounding throughout the whole file.
Will they sound like reverb?
Yes, it just sounds like the reverb, basically.
Okay, all right.
And then, for example, though, I might notice one spot where all of a sudden there's a raw vocal that I can hear.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, the artist has added one line into this spot, and that's the difference, right? So even though it's not a perfect null test where it's all off or all on or whatever, I can still tell, okay, I can see the reverbs and the other stuff, but then this section, there's something else that is different.
Fascinating to think of it as sort of a forensic test for, like what'd they put into this other version?
Well, and a lot of times the reason to do that for me is we'll cheat a little bit. Like if the artist has said, I want this, everything's perfect, there was just one vocal line that's different, I'll find that vocal line and then I'll actually edit the new mix into the old one because I've already done all of the other work on the first version of the mix that they loved everything of except this line. So now I don't have to redo my noise removal. I don't have to redo running things through my chain again. I only have to run through that one section and then I edit it in. So
that makes sense.
That's another way
cool
to save time. And I'll use the null test to figure out what section do I actually need to edit in. So
that one spot where the vocal leaps out, it's like,
right. We'll just the difference.
Clip that out.
Yep.
Comp it right into the master.
100%.
Comping your master.
Yes. We used to do that a lot more at Georgetown. We did the, and I don't think they work this way anymore, but it was like a process of real-time dither. So we would we would actually take the 24-bit, send it to a converter that was doing real-time dither to it, and then re-record it back in. So if anyone ever wanted to change one thing on a record, like one song, you either had to re-record the whole thing or just edit in that one section.
Right.
So that's why we got good. That's how I got good at doing that.
So real-time dither, what's that all about? What is dither? Why is it still even a thing?
That's a good question. So dither is a mysterious process that I think a lot of people, and I am certainly not an expert on, but I think a lot of people don't quite understand what its purpose is. There's some really good websites, and I don't have one in front of me on my top of my head, but there are some cool websites where they'll show examples of things that have been dithered and things that haven't. But essentially what dither is the best description I've heard actually is like adding noise to a photograph. So basically when you're recording at, this particularly happens when you're going from one higher bit depth to a lower bit depth. Sorry, it's going to get like very technical and my brain is a little spacey. So keep me on track if you need to. But
bring on the nerdery.
Yeah, right. So bit depth is essentially a measure of how accurately we can document volume information, right? So basically, no sound we'll say is I don't know. Well, we always use it this way: negative 128 decibels or whatever. And using all of the bits available to us is 0 dB full scale. And everything in between, all bit of sound needs to somehow fall in between those 2 points.
And there's your dynamic range.
And that's dynamic range, exactly. So what bit depth is essentially saying how many individual spots within that dynamic range can I use to measure this audio? So one way I think of it is if a 24-bit 24-bit file is like measuring volume automation in millimeters, and a 16-bit file is like measuring it in inches,
right?
Where you essentially still get the same general shape and information, but you cannot as accurately define what the value of that volume really was.
Right, and my Atari 2600 8-bit sample is measuring it in big giant Lego blocks.
Exactly. So where this comes in to be a real problem is especially in quiet information. So during the fade out of a song, once you get down to not using very many of the bits in a 16-bit file, you'll start to hear the audio kind of warble or drop out in certain spots or get a little bit like crackly. And that sensation is just those bits getting... when you start with a 24-bit file and then you go down to 16, you're essentially just like changing the values of all of those volume points. And that information is not as accurate in the 16-bit file. So you get these little jumps and these little imperfections in the sound. And what dither does is it essentially applies a very low-level amount of noise, just a staticky sound to the file, which just gives some information to fill those gaps and makes the file feel much smoother when it's at 16-bit during those quiet fade-outs. And it's really hard to describe, but like you should definitely look online for this if you're curious, because you can definitely hear in the undithered files where it almost sounds like a digital error as it fades out. And then with the dithered ones, it feels smooth and sounds totally right. So
it's so fascinating.
It's a fascinating thing.
Along comes digital, which is, quote, noise free. And then the first thing you need to do to make it work is add some noise,
yep,
right?
Exactly.
Make some noise, rock stars. And, the funny thing to hear you describe it too is it's not about the fact that noise in the audio sounds good. It's about the fact that turning that into, digital pogo sticks that are added together that represent analog waveforms.
Right.
It's like a better version of these pogo sticks dancing up and down.
Totally. Yep.
to make what comes out of the speaker sound good.
Yep.
I love it. What did I just say about don't I just lost it. I was going to write down a quote about the dither. Okay, cool. Well, so let's stay at Georgetown mastering for a minute. So
sure.
What about some stuff you remember learning at Georgetown, some of your experiences there?
Such a cool experience, such a cool team. So when I started there...
Also, did you ever screw up?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It was so that was a really big learning curve for me. So I started at Georgetown right out of college. I luckily, again, through Alex Perialas, God bless him, he knew Andrew Mendelson. Andrew had also gone to Ithaca College. He was not in the same degree program as me because it didn't exist at the time. And Andrew was kind of responsible for sort of starting it, to be honest. He would like steal gear from the communication school and bring it over to the music school. And they kind of set up like a recording thing. And that got it all started, which is kind of neat. So we already had the Ithaca connection. Alex was like, hey, you should go intern at Georgetown Masters in Nashville. And it all just worked out. And there was another employee who was actually just going to leave literally when I moved into town. And it was just this nice little seamless,
Did
transition.
you ever know, or do you know Nick Bullock?
Yeah.
Producer, he came down here from Ithaca as well.
Yes, he did.
I don't know if you guys knew the Ithaca connection.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen him in a couple of years now, actually. Hi, Nick, if you're listening. But no, love him. All the Ithaca people. It's such a cool place.
Yeah. My cousin's up there making music. Jenny Lowe.
Oh, huh. I don't think I know
Great
Jenny
musician,
Lowe.
great singer and songwriter.
Yeah.
Hi, Jenny.
So I came down to Nashville, and it just all worked out. Where this employee was leaving, and I got hired after interning for like 3 months, which was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe I was actually going to like work in the music industry. I kind of always, wanted to and believed I could, but like it's kind of amazing to actually be like, wow, I get to listen to music and get paid for it. That's insane.
Well, I mean, your first stop in New York City probably gave you that sense of like, wow, music is a fun experiment to I'm living in the middle of professional record making.
100%. Yep. And I also felt like, I really want to do this. Like it felt like a fun atmosphere. I loved the people. I loved the vibe of just the attitudes of creative people. I realized I like being around creative people more than anyone else, to be honest.
No matter what style of music you create, Native Instruments provides you all the instruments you need, from drums, loops, and beats to vintage and modern synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I really enjoy recording real bands in my studio, but then adding amazing overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, or Hybrid keys. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get complete start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. So talk about the transition from being a Yankee to coming down to Nashville, because I did that too. I came down from Boston, but I'd love to hear your version of that.
It's funny because it wasn't so different for me because I grew up in such a rural place in Minnesota that it felt very Southern. I mean, there was like, Confederate flags on people's like cars and things.
Up in Minnesota?
Yep. Yeah. And it was very much like I grew up on a lake, and so it was like ice fishing and hunting and whatnot were like the things that people did, which I didn't really fit in with that crowd much, but would like, go along for that was the only game in town. So coming down here, actually, New York felt very urban in a way that, is New York.
Yeah.
But coming down here, this actually felt more like a city to me than what I had been living in and growing up in. So the transition was actually quite easy in that regard. And also just loved Nashville. It was like this, because I moved in 2008, so it was before the giant boom, or it was right at the beginning of the boom.
Right.
So I got to experience the Nashville where it was 10 minutes to anywhere in town, and there was a cool show everywhere with like cool people all the time in these small bars and whatnot. And
downtown tourism was still just a suggestion.
Exactly. It was mostly Vandy kids, I feel like. It was like on the weekends, it was all Vanderbilt students downtown. And now it's just not like that at all. So that transition was actually really pretty easy. And I have really loved Nashville. Now I'm pretty ingrained. I married a woman who's born and raised in Nashville, and her family's all here. We actually live down the street from our in-laws. So that's a lot of fun. And being so far from my family in Minnesota, it's nice feeling like I have it was like moving into a whole nother second family down here. So it was lovely.
What about musical tastes and styles? So now listening to your discography, which we have a link to in the show notes, Rockstars, please scroll down and listen to these great records that Daniel's doing. There's a lot of country music. There's a lot of country meets Americana kind of stuff. There's stuff with Billy Strings in it.
Yeah.
There's rock bands too. Did you start out? Do you feel like your musical taste has traveled with you to New York and to Nashville, or do you
100%.
feel like your musical taste has changed and evolved through the work that you've done too?
I think both, but certainly from the moving around most. So when I grew up, I fell in love with hard rock music. That was what, ignited this whole passion in me, was basically wanting my records to sound like Metallica and trying to figure out why I couldn't do that. And that struggle is what made me, kept me up. I think for all of us, same thing, up all night, every night, do a mix, bounce the mix, go to the speaker, in your house or car, listen to it, be like, it still doesn't sound right, and then go back and do it again, right? So that was the passion at first, was that. But then when I went to Ithaca, that was part of the music school. So I have a bachelor's of music degree in trombone. So I also had to now learn, and that's all classical music. So learn all of the normal, regimen of music theory and sight singing and performance that all music conservatory kids would have to go through. And so that made me start loving that music.
But when you're trying to make the Metallica, your attitude was nothing else matters.
Nothing else matters, 100%. And then I was like, oh, actually, Gustav Mahler's kind of cool. So then I started, really liking classical music and immersing myself in that. And there was a lot of recording opportunities at Ithaca, tons of ensembles. I think the one cool thing about that program was they recorded every single thing that was ever performed on campus, which was, I think, over 400 events a year. So I was in charge, my junior year, I was in charge of the recording program. So me and a team of 25 people would record literally everything.
Yeah.
And that gets you also just a lot of them were you have to go set up the microphones and everything right beforehand. And so it was a ton of experience of getting good mic sounds, learning stereo mic placements, capturing room instead of just close miking instruments, and that kind of, that taught me a lot about a lot of very practical recording basics that I think a lot of kids, especially if you do it on your own, you don't know. But I still remember the difference between an NOS and an ORTF and a Bloomline stereo placement.
What's an NOS?
Well, so the NOS is a 90 degree,
so like an ORTF.
It's like an ORTF, but it's a narrower degrry. I think ORTF is 110.
Yeah, 110 or something
like that. And I think NOS, if I remember right, is 90. Now, of course, it's been 20 years, so
right.
Don't quote me on that.
Right, but what's interesting about doing those kinds of recordings is they're less about multi-track mixing techniques,
100%.
like a multi-tracked album is, and you're trying to construct a Frankenstein that never existed before.
Exactly.
And more about a capture of something that happens. So in a way, I feel like there's more opportunity to learn the mastering side of the equation when you're doing those kind of recordings, because
interesting.
It's you get the balance, and then at the 2 mix is where you're doing all the magic.
That's true, actually. That's a really good point. I had not thought of that, but that is a very good point. It is much more like mastering, working in that classical world, because you're more dealing with the sum of the whole instead of the individual parts. That's really fascinating. I'd never thought of it, but I think you're right.
So it's probably great that you had that experience and had all those different recordings so you could really experience it.
Definitely.
I remember, I did a lot of live to DAT recordings because my first tape machine was a DAT machine. So whatever we were recording, I went down to 2-track, and then I'm like, okay, what can I do to enhance this sound? It was a lot of fun to, run it back through some Neve EQs and some more, the combinator, the Behringer combinator.
The Behringer combinator. We had one at school. That's the best Behringer box that's ever been built. Secret weapon.
Was it the first?
Or I don't know. I have no idea. But it was that cool multi-band compressor. It was really neat.
It's funny that, this is sort of a jab, but it's funny that nobody's come along and ripped off the Behringer combinator from Behringer.
I'm kind of surprised myself. It's a great box.
And where's the plug-in?
Right. Agreed.
It just made all the mixes sound so good back then.
It did. It flattened. It was like a multi-band limiter almost. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was like compression and limiting.
Yeah.
Brad Jones had one at Alex the Great, and he taught me that the cool thing about it is you could work on your mix, but you could glance over at the meters, and if you saw any frequency working hard,
you'd know
that could be an indicator that that's the one you need to chill out on or something, like,
That's
especially
really
bass and low end.
That's funny. Funny. I hadn't thought about that. That and the finalizer, that was another big one. The TC Electronics finalizer.
Which came a little later.
A little later. But we did have one of those too.
And that was digital.
Fun. Yep.
The combinator was an analog box.
Piece. Yep. That's funny.
Very cool. Okay, cool. So let's jump forward and talk a little bit about your studio now. So tell us about your space at Infrasonic.
Sure. So I'm working at Infrasonic. I have been here now for, oh boy, I don't even know, 5 years. Wow, time flies.
Although we are joining you from Pod Dammit Studios today, Rockstars.
That's funny. The studio that I'm in is right now. I'm in a stereo room myself. I also do work in Atmos now, but we have a separate Atmos room.
Does anybody have a mono room?
No, I don't think that they do. That'd be really funny.
That'd be pretty cool.
That would be real. Actually, that'd be kind of a neat niche that maybe need to look into.
Bring a mono back.
But yeah, so it's a smaller room at Infrasonic Mastering, or Infrasonic, sorry, small room at Infrasonic in Green Hills. I absolutely have loved it. I work in a hybrid setup, so I have basically my process is, computer runs DAW, which goes to a converter and then goes through my analog chain, come back to a converter, and then back into the DAW. And have been doing that pretty much my whole career. That's how I started doing it in 2008 and have been doing it like that ever since. Have slowly moved a little bit in the box for just specific projects. But for the most part, still almost always do the analog loop. And we have pretty much all PMCs at our studio. So I'm using the 6.2s, which are awesome. I just switched to those earlier this year. I had been using the Bowers & Wilkins 802Ds, which I think also
I saw that
love.
in a picture.
Yeah.
Too.
I love those too. But the PMCs in the smaller room, what's really cool is the PMCs have a little more, there's like a tighter low end, a little more defined low end. And because they're smaller, I can get them off the floor and get all the tweeters actually aimed at my ears. Mm-hmm. With the B&Ws, a lot of them were going straight into the desk, which was especially the low frequencies would hit the desk and start getting all wonky. And that has all been cleaned up super well by the PMCs. The other secret, though, to my room is using the Trinnov ST2 room correction.
Right.
That is, I am not a big believer in this kind of stuff. Like, I definitely am a keep the signal pure kind of person, don't mess with it. But that box makes it possible for me to work in a smaller room, and it's not even close. Let's be
more clear. Keep the signal pure and don't mess with it after I just messed the hell out of it.
Exactly.
With my mix and my tracking and my mastering.
That's true. I'm the only one that gets to mess with the audio. But no, the Trinnov is just a game changer. And if you've never heard one, they are extremely expensive, but they are worth every single penny. The basic, for those who don't know, the way a Trinnov works is it's essentially a full computer that runs in a 2-rack. Well, now there's a 1U1, doesn't matter. But a full computer runs in a piece of rack gear that they also give you a microphone, this cool microphone that has like 4 or 5 capsules in it. And you place the microphone at the listening position. It does a bunch of shooting, kind of like the RU software that I can't remember who makes it now. But anyways, it does a lot of, it shoots a lot of tones around the room, listens to those, and then applies not only EQ to your speaker setup for your room, but it also does a lot of phase relationship things. So it can sense what frequency ranges are coming back, or like, let's say, bouncing off of your desk, and then now hitting the listening position out of polarity with where it should be. And it will actually correct that, which is unbelievable. And it actually does a good job. It's for the first time I've ever experienced a piece of gear where it's a piece of room correction software where you do it and you're immediately like, yeah, that's way better. Holy cow. So I have no affiliation with them. I bought my unit used, but I love it.
Yeah,
so much.
They've definitely come up on the podcast. I've met those guys.
Yeah.
I think it was at an AES event, and I heard a demo at Sears Sound, and it was pretty cool. I was just sitting it was an ISO booth, and a couple of speakers were set up, and it was like, here's the speakers, and then just hit a switch.
That's awesome.
And all of a sudden, where I'm sitting in the back of the ISO room where it was tuned for. It just like everything just came into focus and it was like super focused.
Isn't that wild?
Really
and you can do this. You can set up different listening positions. So I could set up one on my back couch in my room for the producer, whoever listening in the back, which is nuts.
Or for yourself. I mean, I like
yeah.
going to the back couch just to get away from the speakers up front.
That's a really smart idea. Yeah.
Although I think I like the bass boost. So if it got rid of the bass boost for me, I might be.
That's like, a good point. That is kind of the joy of sitting in the corner.
Yeah. And then also, the moving around the studio, to hear what things sound like in different parts, of the room where things aren't balanced, that's the real world experience of music. So it's still valuable 100%. To do that,
Yep.
I think the challenge is when you start making decisions in different spaces and then you lose your sense of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily that's what the car's for.
Exactly. I still do car tests all the time. I love it. And it's definitely not a crutch, I don't think. I think a lot of people think of it like that, but no, it is where else do you listen to more music than your car? It's got to sound good there.
Adam Audio is celebrating 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Adam Audio are unveiling a special limited edition series of monitors that will look stunning in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series. Available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself, the clean, glossy white finish exudes a luxurious feel and will stand out in any studio or home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V retain the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Adam Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as cool as your music sounds. Don't miss out on the limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. I am really impressed with Isotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by analyzing the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You just adjust the settings to your taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can manipulate the level of the vocal, bass, and drums even at the mastering stage. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding, but now when I send off the masters for approval, they absolutely love the way our records sound thanks to Isotope. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Lite at isotope.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Daniel Bacigalupi, joining us here at Podzilla Studios at Potty Mouth Productions.
Love it.
You ready to jam, dude?
Let's do it.
All right, so tell us more about your studio. So you've got the PMC monitors, you're set up for stereo.
Correct.
But you guys are an immersive Atmos mixing studio as well.
Yes.
And you also have people mixing in 360, Sony 360 on the West Coast, I think.
That's correct. Yep.
So talk a little bit about, what else is in your studio. And if we do need to talk about immersive stuff, let's talk about that too.
Okay. Are you curious more about gear or?
Yeah, whatever. Like, what are your tools? What are you surrounded by in a space? What needs to go into a mastering studio for you to have all your
I love it.
things?
So for me personally, I am definitely not a gear person, which I think is kind of rare for this industry. I like things that I really like, but I am not a go find the new thing kind of person. I like tools that I feel are really versatile, but also do something specific that a lot of masters I find need. So, for example, my chain starts off, I use Wavelab as the DAW, my DAW currently. It's working pretty well. I overall have no real complaints about it. Using a specific mastering DAW is pretty essential, I think, if you want to do mastering as a profession, as your full-time, as even if it's just a hobby, if it's the main way that you're making music is the mastering stage, I would use a mastering specific DAW. There are lots
of a cool looking one too.
Which one? Wavelab?
Yeah, for some reason I picture red, white, and blue. Is it, or is it like sort of
used to be that
blue, gray?
Yeah. So now they've gone to like dark mode. So it is still blue and red are the default colors of the audio. So they do like left is blue and right channel is red on every audio file. But then now they've got in this like nice dark mode. So it does look a little less 4th of July than it used to. But using a mastering specific DAW is, I think there are features and ways that they work that are essential for being a mastering engineer that can create anything that anyone wants. So for example, Wavelab can make a DDP straight from Wavelab. It can handle all kinds of audio forensics, archive, adjustments. You can do all kinds of, time stretch things / dither, or
they're all built in. You don't need third-party plugins.
Exactly. And it's also just laid out in a different way. So Wavelab is not structured in the sort of track mixer method that a lot of DAWs are, where you have each track has a fader that matches it. It's more like you have your one stereo track in front of you, and you can add a few more tracks if you want, but it's really designed to have maybe like 3 to 5 tracks max up on the screen at a time.
Interesting. So yeah, the 2 lanes of audio would typically be song 1 going into song 2, going into song 3, and they just sort of alternate lanes, right?
That's one way to do it. I actually do it all on one. And the way that Wavelab works is the way that it's all marker based, not audio file based. So for example, I essentially think of a record that I'm working on as one canvas of audio that I put markers on where I want things to start and stop. This way I can, I don't think about like continuous tracks necessarily. That's where one track fades into another and the track starts right in the middle of the audio.
Right.
I don't even really necessarily think about that as 2 separate tracks, as much as like, this is my space in front of me, and then right where I want that one to start, I just place a marker, and that's now when I export the files, even though they're overlapping and they're on the same track, it doesn't matter. It'll just export from that spot.
So if you had 2 files in Wavelab that sonically are going to fade and overlap, like the tail of one fades over or continues while the fade in of the next song is happening, so they blend together, would they look like they crossed like a crossfade on your screen, or would they look like they're totally separated and there's just markers?
They would look like they're crossed on the screen, but they're laying on top of each other. So the way you can tell is that it turns it orange. Basically, it's always white on the audio when you select it, unless they're overlapped, and then where it's overlapped, it'll put orange.
Okay, cool.
So you know that 2 files are overlapped there. The other thing you have to be a little careful about with this, though, is also making sure you limit. Sorry, we're going down a little rabbit hole here, but making sure you limit everything when you do continuous audio. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say you had one track with that you had put a limiter on the audio file itself, and then you wanted that to fade with another track that also has a limiter. And both of those limiters are at like 0 dB full scale, so nothing will go over. But where they overlap, they're going to add those 2 files together. So you're going to go over 0.
Louder.
Right. Yeah, it could go over 0 because you have one limited track and another limited track playing together with no limiter on them. So in that case, what you have to do is be sure that your track, this is what's cool about Wavelab too, your track can put a limiter on it. So essentially, I use that too in continuous records just as like a safety. I'll put like a Waves L2 that's doing nothing except just cutting off at 0 dB full scale just to make sure that no overs
And
get
when
through.
you say continuous record, that just is reminding us that we could be talking about mastering a single song or a collection of single songs, or we could be talking about mastering songs ordered together as an album.
By continuous too, what I mean specifically is that there's no dead air between them. There's no track breaks
Okay, great.
in the audio.
Okay.
Sorry, yes. So so that's something to be aware of too. But anyway, sorry, we were talking about my studio.
Well,
so
but I'll stay there for a sec. So initially, that was the aha moment for me about mastering software. And I think the first one I used was Wave Burner from Logic.
Yeah.
And learned that. And it's like, oh, wow, cool. This one, you put all the plugins on the song itself.
Yes.
And then that way you're adjusting each song to sound however you want it to. And then they export. Whereas in Pro Tools, traditionally, if they were all on the same track, you'd have to put the plugins on the track. They all have the same plugin.
Yep.
So that was a little bit of a challenge. Now, of course, Pro Tools, you can do, I can't remember if we now have third-party plugins as clip plugins or anything like that, but you could do clip EQ.
You can do the EQ, the bass
and stuff
EQ
like
and
that.
stuff. Yeah.
So you kind of, it's sort of like everything's sort of ultimately in the future down the road, you just turn to your robot and just make my record.
But you also, you're right, the clip-based stuff offers cool things that I think a lot of people don't think they can do. So for example, let's say I have a song where there's just one tom hit that like blows up the recording, but it's just that tom hit and it's just got too much low end. I can just edit that one tom hit, just basically make a cut in the audio file so it's now its own little piece. And when it still plays totally smooth and continuous. But I can put an EQ now just on that one piece of audio.
And this is, we're back to WaveLab.
Back to WaveLab, yes.
When you're in WaveLab,
so if there was the big tom hit, I just make two little edits around it, put an EQ on that one tom hit just for that 1 second, and now it can play through and will not blow up the speakers, but will not affect everything else around it because I can just put that EQ on for a brief second without having to deal with automation or anything like that. Because that's really annoying to, if someone reorders a record, like changes the sequence of a record, for example, and now this song needs to move to the end. When I move that, you have to make sure all the automation follows and all that stuff if it's in the program like that. But if it's a file with just a plugin on it, as long as I copy and paste and move it, it's all going to stay exactly how it should be.
So let me back up and say that back to you. So in a mastering software like WaveLabs, you can have the songs ordered on the screen. Maybe they're on the same track, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Each song has a collection of plugins that are part of that song file.
Yep.
But you're saying even within that, you can chop out the tom hit and put an additional plugin or EQ just on that tom hit.
Correct.
And it would somehow know to do something special to the tom hit, but it would also know that the tom hit's still part of the whole song.
Correct.
That has the collection of song plugins.
Yep, exactly. So what's cool about it is let's say you have a clip in WaveLab that has all the plugins on it, and then I make those two edits where the tom is going to be, it will still copy all the plugins back on to my new clip. So now I can just open up whatever EQ I have. And so it's not like I actually even have to add another EQ. All I need to do is adjust the EQ I do have for this one section of the song.
Okay, very cool. All right. And then beyond the plugins that are part of each song, you can have an overall plugin that's part of the track,
Correct.
Like you were saying.
Yep.
That way you can have like a limiter that sort of is a last
safety,
a last catcher's mitt.
Exactly.
Before the sound leaves is exported. But you can also do other cool things. I use Studio One now a lot in the project view, but I think WaveLab has got versions of this too. You can also have like a master fader. You can have a post fader plugins, and you can have just plugins that are just in the monitor section.
Correct. You can do that.
Which don't process the audio at all. They just process what you're hearing. What you're hearing. The speakers.
100%. And a lot of people use room correction stuff there. I know, for example.
Right. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
awesome.
It does have all those features. It is kind of neat. Once you get your brain sort of out of the Pro Tools way of thinking and the normal DAW structure, you realize how powerful and actually versatile it is. I think it really confuses people when they first use it and they feel like they can't do anything because they're like, I need another track. I need the mixer. I need the faders. And it's like, you really don't, But yeah.
Yeah, so if you're using SonarWorks, for example, reference as a plugin, you could put that
You can put that on the
master
monitor
section.
plugin section.
Right. Which I guess you would do in a Pro Tools session, you'd be doing that as a plugin on your master bus, but then you have to remember to turn it off before you print, which is always a bit of a headache.
The way I would get around that, I think if I was running a Pro Tools is, as long as I had the delay compensation to handle it, is have one track first that the mix gets printed to, like an aux, and then that feeds the one with the monitoring, and then you always bounce from the one without the monitoring on it. So that would be like a way to work around it. But
of course, the challenge with that always was you're doing this compensation stuff within the converters, and the converters are also spitting out your final master of the song.
True.
And you're trying to master the final master somehow sometimes, not always, but sometimes to push the limits and boundaries of that converter like a real world consumer experience. So it's a little bit of a brain twister where you're like, whereas with your Trinoff box, it's an outside box outside of the computer.
Correct.
So you can max it out for the consumer experience, and then it leaves and goes to this other box that has maybe its own additional headroom, can do some processing, hit your speakers.
Totally could. And none of that then ever gets baked into a master accidentally because it's not part of the actual DAW. It's just part of the monitoring chain. So that's nice.
Cool. Well, all right. So let's see. Let's back up. What should we back up to? What are some things that you would put in those master sections while you're mastering?
Plugin wise?
Yeah, like what tools are useful there?
Well, the way I'll give you kind of the synopsis of how I would approach a song. The start for me, let's say it's a single, not on a record. I'm just mastering a country single, for example. The first step is I actually put a digital EQ and a de-esser on the track to start. They're both off. They're both disengaged. But this is before hitting my console. And I use those to kind of get rid of, I use the EQ to do sort of what I call fixing EQ, or like if there's any sort of EQ curves that I think need to be made to the master. I will usually do those digitally with something like a Pro Q3, something that's very clean and very transparent, but also very surgical and accurate.
Like flexible,
Exactly. And so that way I'm not, at this stage, I'm not really worried about like coloring the track or kind of its overall feel yet. It's more about like, ooh, there's like a little too much 300 hertz in this. Like, let's just clean that up a little bit.
It's a correction.
Exactly. And then you also get a lot of masters, especially, or mixes, especially now, need a little bit of de-essing once they get through your whole mastering chain with all the limiting and compression and whatnot. That'll just bring out a lot of those S's. So I usually start with a de-esser too, and it's off to start, but then as I master, I'll go back and adjust it. But it actually lives on the clip before hitting my whole chain. So I'll start with that, and then from there, the master plays out of my computer and goes AES into normally a head 192 is my main converter. I love that converter for D to A. I love it so much. It's not a quantum one yet. I might get it upgraded, but the quantums also sound very good. But that's my main D to A that feeds the chain. And then that goes to a Mesalec MTC1X, which is a transfer console or a mastering console or any other names for it. But essentially what it is a console that has stereo inputs, a bunch of inserts where you can insert analog gear and pop it in and out, and then analog gain, and then stereo outputs.
Does it actually look like a console? Is it a physical thing with some faders on it?
Not faders, almost all dials. But yeah. It is definitely like a 3U rack unit.
He's pulling up a photo now to show you through the microphone.
Yes, exactly. I kind of want you to see it, just so you know. But
so it's got dials, so you can it's detented dials, probably is my guess.
Correct. And in fact, it's not even detented. It is all discrete resistors.
Right.
So there's no. It's
kind of what I meant.
Yeah.
So when you're going one click louder or one click softer. It's going through matched left and right pairs of resistors.
Exactly.
So that it's very precise, right? Cool. Dig it. Oh, yeah, right on. This looks like the Soundtech EQ.
Yes, it is. The Soundtech style knobs and whatnot. But what's cool about a mastering console, or people call them transfer consoles, is you can easily pop gear in and out using this insert section. So I can pop an EQ in, pop it out, see what I like. I can reorder the gear if I want to using that, which is a lot of fun.
It has a knob on it called elliptical filter. I want an elliptical filter. I've never had an elliptical filter.
It's a lot of fun. So the console's really made for cutting vinyl, and that is, the elliptical filter is there for that.
Okay.
I rarely actually use it on the console.
It has a button called power. I have one of those.
Yep, it's very good at that. But it does other fun things, like it has multiple monitoring outputs. So one cool thing I do, for example, is I really like to reference other audio when I work. I don't work a lot with meters and I don't shoot for targets, but I do reference a lot of other things. But in order to do that fairly, you need to make sure you're playing back whatever you're referencing at exactly the same environment and level as what your studio is running at. So what I've done is I have my computer audio that goes to out digitally to a Lavry Blue, which is my, I have a Lavry Blue that I use for monitoring. So I have 4 stereo channels of D to A in that. One of them is my mastering software that I monitor. And then one of them is my computer audio. So I'm essentially using the same D to A converter for my mastering chain as I am for my references. And then because it's a Lavry Blue with changeable gain, I can level match. So I am certain that 100% what I'm listening to off of Amazon HD or whatever is coming at the exact level that I mastered it at. And I've even done some cool tests where I've taken something I've mastered and compared it, and Amazon HD is great, by the way. They actually stream full PCM audio. They don't goof up my masters. I recorded one in and did a null test, and it nulled perfectly with my master.
Meaning you had the master in hand in studio.
Correct.
But it had also been released and was available on Amazon. And so streaming it back, you were able to flip phase and level match the two.
And it didn't even need to level match on that one. I recorded it in digitally. So I went AES out of my computer into my sound card again and recorded the digital feed from the stream. And it was perfect bit for bit with my master.
It's sort of funny that what was so special about it coming back was that nothing special had happened to it at all.
And
right?
that's amazing. I mean, Spotify is just awful. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that out loud. They really changed the sound of the files, though. Spotify really, whatever encoder they're using is just like not awesome. But Apple Music sounds great in general, especially their lossless stuff also sounds great. I've never done the test to be sure that nothing's changing, but I can say Amazon is awesome.
Well, I hate this about the internet and all the services that let things come and go through the internet, but we're last on the list, rock stars. Audio, most of the internet just doesn't give a crap about us. I hate it. They actually care a lot more about the video, and the only part they ever care about audio is that voices can be transmitted
100%.
So that people can communicate, you know?
I actually wanted to look into this years ago. I thought it'd be cool to do like an AES paper on why is it that TV screens and video keeps getting bigger and higher quality and more, and audio is literally going the other way. It's like, how small can we make this file to be sure we can give it to you in an email or whatever, you know? And how do we get that disconnect? Like, why is it that humans love to go for quality video? Maybe it's just more of a immediate visceral noticing that it's better or something.
I think visual. I think eyesight is. I think we just place more weight on eyesight than we do on our listening. I mean, as professionals, we listen pretty intensely to all kinds of stuff.
That's true.
But I mean, you know, it's easier to plug your ears and still run through the house than it is to close your eyes and still run through the house.
That's a good point. You know what I mean? That's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's a good point.
And I don't recommend you test that out.
But I have wondered the same thing and noticed the same thing. It's like, how do we change that narrative to flip it, you know?
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM artists, TV and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need amazing sounds that instantly elevate our music to the desired style. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit, offering a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're into hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, dance beats, or orchestral arrangements, the Native Instruments Complete Bundle has it all. From drums, loops, and beats to synths, realistic strings, vintage bass, guitars, and keys, it's a comprehensive collection. I love recording real bands in my studio, but then enhancing the tracks with drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. It's a surefire way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. When I was making that reference to the voice, what I'm thinking of is, once again, I was trying to set up a way to do a live stream, using the power of YouTube, where it's like, hey, can't I just show what we're doing and share what we're listening to and have a chat with some people and do it. I'm actually trying to figure out how to, by the point this comes out, hopefully I've already done it, but to do a live stream listening party.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah. So I looked into things like tools like StreamYard, which does streaming. I looked into, what about Zoom? Will Zoom do it? And you mess with all these tools and they'll all say like, oh, high quality or musician mode or pro audio. And then you try it, and you're exhausted and your friend's on the other end of the video call going, no, it's not on the left. Bad. It's in mono. Yeah. It kind of sounds weird, and you're like, oh, I'm so sick of trying this. So then the most recent one I've been messing with, once again, it's called OBS, which is really great open source software that lets you kind of get away with, digital murder through the internet, I guess, if you want to say, because you could just do almost anything you can think of with video and audio. Yeah. But boy, is it complex. Reminds me of Reaper, as we were joking about, because it's like there's a lot of settings under the hood that you got to check out, and
they all have weird names and things, and it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, but even in that world, I think the high quality audio is possible, but again, it's like an afterthought,
right,
for the designers of this stuff.
Are you familiar with Audio Movers?
Yeah, but there's not a way to. Audio Movers doesn't give you, or at least I hadn't figured out an easy strategy for doing like a Zoom style call where everybody's hearing stereo.
Correct.
And live stream it to the internet.
There is not a great way
Even the Zoom style call, it's like, what's going to happen on the other end? Somebody's hearing the high quality audio, but it's coming back through their mic. Does it get canceled?
No, that's a really good question. Yeah. Because I have done, I had set up something with Ray, actually. She did a presentation the other day, and what she did was gave them an Audio Movers link that all the people were listening to in their own browser window, separate from the Zoom call, but that doesn't really help the streaming problem.
Right, and you're probably talking a one-way thing where you're presenting.
Yes.
So you can just turn off your mic.
Exactly.
When it's playing.
When
it's playing, yeah.
Yeah. So
but it's right. I'll figure it out for us, Rockstars. And when I do, I will share it with the world.
That sounds fun.
Okay, cool. So let me go back to more questions about your studio. You've got your files. You start up with some DigiQ is available.
Correct.
You've got your de-essing ready to go. Then you're going out of a DAC into the Maslec MTC-1X. Don't quiz me on this later. Mastering console. That lets you do things like insert analog processing. What are things that you might insert in the analog world?
I have just a few pieces of gear that I really love. First and foremost, I have to say the Moog, the EQ4M is unbelievable. Love the whole Moog family. They're wonderful human beings. They're out in Utah and they make really high quality gear. And the Moog EQ is really cool because it is, there's no selectable frequency bands. The bands are fixed, And there's also no cue selection. So everything is just a fixed band with a fixed cue at these very specific EQ points that keep it. It's like a linear phase analog EQ. The low, what I mostly use it for is the low end. There's a sub knob that a lot of times one click down, and it's below 40 hertz because there's a 40 hertz knob too. So I'm not sure even what frequency it is, but a little half dB down on that will clean up muddy mixes extremely well.
Have to be cut.
Have to be cut. Yes,
right,
have to be cut. And then the airband is magical on that EQ. And there's the one that I have, I think it has a 40, a 20, and a 15. And the 40 is almost an always on for me. It just sounds lovely. And I think it works well with my desk to kind of, it's not even adding any top end so much as it's just sort of, it feels more open with that in.
Interesting. Do you actually hear a clarity in top things like the crisp attack on an acoustic guitar, for example?
Yes.
Or is it more like you just sense this openness to the sound, like depth?
It depends on the mix and the arrangement. If something has a lot of top end in it, I actually find that it's more obvious. If something is a little darker, I don't feel like I notice much of the top end when it gets added in. But if something already has a lot of excitement happening in that top range, and I don't mean too much, I just mean like the recording happens to be a little brighter recording, then that 40 hertz band really clears, like it just makes the things that were kind of like bitey and crisp just glorious sounding.
Wow. And so the low sub thing helping the muddiness remove is a half dB click. So that's one of the great reminders for us rock stars is like how much are we moving these knobs in the mastering world? And it's really, it can be. I mean, I'm sure you make bold moves too at some points, but maybe you don't.
Pretty rarely.
He made a face, rock stars. He made a face. His face said, "I don't make bold moves. I make smart, subtle moves."
I think, a lot of people, this is actually getting sort of like the philosophies of mastering and whatnot, but I think a lot of people approach mastering with this idea of like, here's a song, what can I do to it? Instead of, here's this song, what does it need?
Right.
If that makes sense. And a really big part of this job is realizing when you need to get out of the way. I think a lot of engineers want to put their stamp on something, and when a lot of times what really needs to happen is just less. Very much, it sounds cliche, but the less is more mentality is definitely true for mastering.
When I've been mastering my own stuff, it's a great opportunity to just dive in there and find it, experience these different aspects of it. And one of them I experienced, I finally like sat down and like really learned Ozone and Mastering Assistant, dabbled in all the modules and stuff, and don't have fancy outboard gear, so wasn't leaning on that, just staying digital. But I would find that it would suggest bold moves. And at first I might be like, wow, boy, that's so much bigger. And then I'd find myself backing it off, backing it off. And until I finally got to a point where I was like comparing my master back in the car against my original, I'm like, okay, now this is an improvement, but I didn't lose the thing that I was trying to do in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think a big mentality too that you reminded me of this is like when I listen to a master, a mix that I'm going to master, instead of thinking like, what problems does this have? Or like, are there any issues? My first thing is like, what do I really like about this? What about this recording is making this song special? And how can I make sure that that is enhanced or very out front and obvious, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not always just about making things louder. I think a lot of people think like out front means like loud or more. I don't mean that. I mean like, how do I make sure that like, let's say this one track has this like kick pattern that's just like really the driving factor and it makes you move, and like, maybe the track has too much low end overall. So you send it to Lander and Lander's just like, wow, no low end in this. And now it's lost all of that vibe, right? And so a lot of it is like, yeah, I could do more aggressive moves to make the track more consistent, but that's not the goal. I want to move to this really important kick drum. And so that's a place where subtlety actually, now I'm just going to carve a little bit around it instead of just turning out all the low end.
From Lander to Blander.
Exactly.
I'm just kidding. I'm sure there's probably great use cases for all these different tools that we have. The 40, I want to go back to the 40 hertz, the airband.
Sure.
If a half a dB cut makes that difference in the subs, what kind of move are we talking about for a 40?
Half dB.
Like a half dB. Wow.
Yeah.
Not like cranking it up 3 dB or something like that.
Not at all. Definitely not. This is actually
how would we train our ears to
hear that,
to learn the amount? I mean, did you start out by overcooking it and then back yourself down to that half dB, or how do you get to that point?
I think if I had started out mastering on my own, I would have. But because I started it at Georgetown and Sterling, I first watched them work. And that was where I realized, oh, we do very little to these recordings. Both Greg Calby and Chris Geringer were super duper nice. They let me come into their rooms. Like I spent a day with each of them and like went through their whole process of their mastering and learned like, oh, some of the things I thought were important just are not. And also some of the things that I thought were not important really are. Greg Calvi and I spent an hour trying different mic cables from the tape machine to his desk. And that was like what he was A-Bing and using to decide was which cables were going to be used. So that made me realize like, oh, we're listening on like and I could not hear any of the differences that day. Like I had no clue. I'd love to go back now and see if I could. But yeah, so that made me realize like, oh, we are talking in the subtle world. And then they all had like fancy Sontecs and things, and they were only maybe a dB at the most, but almost always it was like a half dB. And so I just sort of naturally started down that road right from the beginning and didn't have that period of overdoing it. But I see that a lot with people who are like maybe an intern with us or coming up and want to do it. It's definitely, that is a problem of being heavy-handed. And I think it's important to remember like my role in this is not to be the creative decisions and the art itself. I like to think of essentially being completed at this point, right? Like I'm not here to put an artistic spin on this as much as I am to make sure their artistic message is what everyone's listening to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I understand that. Yet at the same time, I also instinctively feel like we're all in this together,
It's true.
Like we're all just trying to kick a field goal, score, soccer goal, whatever.
Score a touchback.
Score a touchback. Score a touch. I love it. Yeah, we're all just trying to like land the disc in the basket at the disc golf course. And so like, hopefully as when you're mastering, you're on the same page about the artistic intent.
Right,
and
exactly.
So you're trying
That's
to
what I
push
mean.
it toward
That's
closer
what I mean.
to that intent.
Exactly.
But it's still an artistic expression.
It is. It's a way. That's the art is for me, mastering the art is the method. Like it's the way you get from what you start with to that product that makes the client be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's exactly what I wanted it to sound like. It's not so much the art isn't that finished project. It's the how you got there and the process.
Yeah. And that to me is a challenge with this, this concept of like, AI assisted things is I think we have to remember that the tools that we have are amazing, incredible. Like the stuff that Isotope makes is just
awesome,
mind bending, what's possible. And the assistant features are also incredible and amazing, except we have to just remember that like they're assisting based on a benchmark. You have to start with a benchmark of some sort.
Exactly.
And so then the question is like, okay, is this benchmark, does it represent what I'm trying to do in this moment?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is it's like any model. Is this guy I listened to that talks about markets, a guy named Benjamin Cowan, and he says like all models are wrong. Some are more useful than others.
That's a great quote.
And it's like that's the same thing when we think about this AI assisted thing. It's like they're all models.
Yep.
So they're all wrong. They're all wrong for what I'm trying to do, but some of them are a little more useful in guiding me in the direction. Yeah. And when I think about the process of making your records when you're working with people throughout the whole process too, is that now you have the power to be able to get to know a producer or a mixer, and you guys begin to develop your own dialogue.
100%.
And like artistic intention and then you create something, and then now there's this body of work out there that's created where the rest of the world gets to look at it and go, hey, maybe we should measure that and figure out how to put that in one of the algorithms to guide
that's true.
everybody. So I think that's just a good way for us to remember how this stuff all coexists.
Well, and it's important to remember that correct, I think, is not, I'm sorry, I'm doing air quotes for those who can't see, correct, as like an AI program would say, is not going to work for all styles. I think particularly to a couple years ago when Billie Eilish's Where Do We Go When We Fall Asleep record came out, that record, according to audio whatever, is horrible. There's way too much low end. It's dark. It's distorted. It's way too smashed, but it's perfect. Like that record sounds amazing, but on paper, on an AES paper, it is wrong. Everything is wrong. And I'd love to send that record, the mixes of that, to Lander and see like what, I'm not like shitting on Lander, by the way. I just mean like to an AI software and see what it does, because there's no way it comes back with what that record sounds like.
Right. And I guess what I was saying earlier is like it took some human beings with bold intentions,
100%.
Artistic intent.
Exactly.
To arrive at that kind of idea.
And AI can never do that because it can never innovate. It is only taking information that already exists and continuing down that path. It can't predict what a human is going to like in any sort of artistic way, right? It can say, in the past, humans have liked artistic things that fell into this, like you said, this window of specific things, but there is no, I think that innovation will, for a good chunk of time now, will still be human-driven.
So if we're on that topic for a moment, I've been following an incredible AI artist for visual art.
Oh.
Peter Valek, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's in Vape Noise, I think is his channel. And John Cunaberti actually.
Oh.
He posted something on Facebook and I saw that. I was like, what?
Of his? That's wild. Huh.
But it's this dude living in Eastern Czech Republic. And the images are like really compelling to me.
Mm-hmm.
I've also shared them with my buddy Ian Shepard, who feels a little differently about it. And
oh, really? He's not a fan?
Yeah, but this is the beauty of art.
Yeah,
right.
Like, it is the beauty of art.
One person can be like, "Ah, this is so great. This is the greatest Metallica song ever," and then the next person's like, "I hate Metallica."
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
But my takeaway from that is I've seen plenty of AI images that don't strike me. That aren't striking, they just seem like another copy of whatever, whereas these ones blow me away.
Interesting.
And to me, it's an example of, again, the human artist, intention, as you said, the interpretation or whatever the wording was you used.
Yeah.
That coupled with the tools and those, AI assistants or, the robots, the future of the robots, that's where like, the cool shit's going to happen.
I think you're right.
So what about for you? Like in what ways as a mastering engineer, and a human artist, are you using these tools to assist you in your job?
The big one right now, I don't use very many of the specifically assistant labeled tools where you feed it and it suggests. But what I have really loved is the new Ozone 11 has these great modules in it that are kind of like what I'd say, I sort of describe them as like generic tools that sound like what they do. And for example, one is called like a stabilizer and one is called low-end focus. And I have found that very delicately messing with those has been a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And it's neat because it's sort of like what you're saying, I don't really know what I'm going to get back. It's not like when I put that 40 hertz band in on that Mog EQ, I know what it's going to sound like in my head before it comes back.
Because it's a setting.
It's a thing, and I've listened to it do it 1,000 times. But with this stuff, sometimes it does something awesome. Like it'll accentuate this guitar part that I didn't even really hear before, or like, bring out cut a whole bunch of low mids that were like actually clouding up the track that I didn't really think
like somebody handed you a whole palette of new paint colors that you didn't know existed.
And then my method is always to get it kind of where I like it, and then I pull each of those settings back a little bit and see what I think.
Yeah.
And if I still like it, I'm going to leave it there. If I now feel like it's missing it, I'll pop them back up. But again, to be sure, I'm always scared when a tool is doing something that I don't really know what it's doing. Like it's just doing something that I'm supposed to listen to and visually see. I think sometimes your ear can get focused, no matter how good you are at this job, your ear can get focused on one thing and just miss something.
Yeah, that's what makes us human. That's actually what makes us capable as humans.
Exactly, yeah.
And artists is their ability to focus.
Yep, totally.
And block everything out.
Totally.
But it's also the thing that trips, it's the tripwire.
Yep, 100%.
For what we do.
So I usually will back them off a little bit once I get them in a good spot, and then kind of like maybe just give like a 5-second break and come back and listen again and say, okay, is it still doing the good thing that I want? Or, and if not, I'll try it back up again. And then sometimes that's, yep, it needed to be up higher, kind of thing.
So for me, an example of our ability to focus is like the messy car, how we can like ignore the mess in the car forever, because we're focused on the driving. Or like, the fact that I could go 2 years with the passenger door not being able to open unless I open it from the inside.
Oh, that's funny.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can ignore it. You just kind of blow it off for ages.
That's funny.
It's that ability to focus. Do you feel like all the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mixing process I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass will take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick, and I'll save a seat for you at the front row table at the Grammys. Okay, so let me talk about another aspect of mastering different genres of records. And one of the things that's become clear to us here at Recording Studio Rockstars is, as a mastering engineer, I will predict now, watch this, this is a live prediction right here on the podcast. Ready? Daniel Bacigalupi, I predict that you have 2 volumes that you listen to music on your speakers in your control room. Is that true or not true?
It's true. It's true. Man, okay, yes. I have one specific volume for loud, and then, to be fair, the quiet, I don't actually have a specific spot, but it's always within a couple
Right,
dB.
it's a dim,
yeah,
it's a dim level. It's down low, right?
Yep. But I do use both. That is very true. I think it's important to do the bulk of your work at a consistent monitoring level. That is very good for you. I think everybody's is probably different. I don't think there's a right answer for anyone, but for me, it's like 86 dB is where I listen to. Because, with Fletcher-Munson curves and all that, there's going to be this sweet spot where the bass response is going to be the most accurate to your ears. Accurate's the wrong word, but the most consistent feeling, for your ears versus maybe someone else that's a little bit quieter volume level or whatever. But on top of that, then I think it's important to go back and listen to records quietly. So when I'm working on a song, what I'll do is, if it's part of a record, I'll master the song and then I'll turn the volume down and pop around the whole record and make sure that everything still feels consistent even at quiet volumes. A lot of times when things are very loud in your room, I think it's actually a lot harder to differentiate volume differences between songs. Sometimes I'll think these 2 songs live really well together, then listen to them at like 70 decibels and be like, whoa, song 2 is way louder than song 1.
Yeah, so that's, I got a couple of things to say about that. One of the things I remember learning about the physics of sound, and again, Fletcher-Munson, maybe it was them doing the test. There's probably been a bazillion audio tests since then. But, you've got, what are the things that you hear differently at different volumes? As you pointed out, as the volume goes up, we hear more bass, we hear more treble. But other studies were like, you hear differences in volume level differently.
I
so
believe
like
it.
at louder volumes,
100% believe it.
a bigger difference sounds smaller.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
like probably it's probably as simple as like our ears are physically compressing the sounds together.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
But therefore, you might make a decision about the vocal level at a loud volume and at a quiet one is totally different, or vice versa.
Totally. Yep.
Although I do feel like I'm more inclined to mix the vocals up loud at a low volume, and then I go to crank it, and I'm like, good Lord, the vocals are taking my head off, or whatever. So there's that difference. I think there's differences probably in masking too.
Yes, 100%.
So like certain sounds at certain mix levels, sounds will mask each other where you don't notice them.
That just happened to me last week on a recording where the hi-hat, everything was great at the normal volume. And then when I played it quietly, like the hi-hat was clearly too loud. And you couldn't tell at all. I even turned it back up and was like, it still seems fine at the loud volume.
And so loud and quiet you would do on the same speakers, or
Correct.
do you
Same
also
speakers.
have a alternate speaker for quiet stuff?
I don't have any smaller speakers. I used to at Georgetown, we were a 2 stereo speaker kind of room, 2 setups.
Right, because actually I'll remember that because I was in the room with Andrew once, and you've got the speakers that are at the desk for working, but then you turn around and then there were these big ass speakers.
Yep, the Nova
so you could
Evolution
listen backwards.
2s. Yeah, those are cool.
Which I'd like to do in my studio. I'd really like
It's
to
a
put
neat
some
way to do
speakers
it.
on the back wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had that blue chair in the middle that you sit in. It was actually, and that's also cool, I think, to get a listening environment. I encourage people actually to just have a listening environment without anything in front of them.
Yeah.
Like get a speaker setup where you can just sit and enjoy, because it is a different experience.
Because we've all got even more rooms and spaces, especially those of us living in cities.
That's how it works, just we're overflows of space. But,
all you New Yorkers and Nashvillians now. I'll use up all those extra rooms in your house for listening room. No, but it would be really sweet. I mean, the times growing up where we'd go visit some is always a doctor's house.
Oh, of course.
Friend of my mom's.
The lawyers.
And then you go in and like they've got a room dedicated to just listening to music with the stereo and the big speakers and the couch. And I was like, God,
100%.
that looks like an awesome idea.
And their record player's not set up correctly.
Well, but they had a hi-fi store.
But it was a $10,000 record player.
That probably came over and did it.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So there's that thing about listening volumes giving us a different perspective on the music.
Right.
So now if I carry that a step further and I think about doing rock and roll records or, big bass records, now you've got an experience that needs to translate to the car in a certain way, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a rock record is something that you crank up on the car stereo.
It still feels good.
And it still feels good. And it's interesting for me to think about how the choices differ if you're going to do that. So for example, at a low volume, I might set the bass kind of big and it fills in, and it's sort of like, filling in the loudness curve at this lower volume on the stereo. But then if I went to go crank it, it might be too much low end and sort of like blow out the speakers. Whereas if I carve that back a little bit, it leaves more headroom for the mid-range to crank up on the car stereo. So those decisions that you find yourself having to make between different genres of music, and is it a challenge to have the 2 listening positions, or, in terms of like, do you kind of have to hear it in the car cranked up to know what it's going to sound like in the car cranked up? I
used to. So part 2 of that is I definitely used to have to go to the car to listen to things. And now I've just gotten comfortable in my room, comfortable enough in my room to not need to do that. But I still will as like a dummy check sometimes if I'm a little bit unsure.
But you're like, you can train your ears to know that at the loud volume, this is what a great sounding rock record sounds like.
Correct.
Right?
And I think it's after just like, years of sitting in front of the same speakers every single day in the same room. And I've also, I've been a mastering engineer and I've also been an assistant. So I've listened to so many things that other people have mastered too. And so I've definitely got just like too much music and sound coming at me out of my room all the time. And so I almost think it's not even a conscious thing, but it's just gotten baked into my brain of like what my room sounds like.
Right.
And I could not master in someone else's room. I couldn't go to your studio and do a good master right now. I would have no reference at all. But in my room now, I've gotten to that point. But as far as like genre to genre, that is, for me, again, a lot of references. So if I'm working on, it's pretty rare that I work on a hip hop track, but it has happened many times. And for that, I definitely don't know my room's low end in that kind of like 808 low end way, but I have my Amazon HD playing at the exact same level as everything else. And now I've got the entire music catalog of references to compare to. And so that's where I start always.
Right.
And I'm not using it to match. It's not like I'm not like I need it to sound like, whatever, Public Enemy. But it's more like I need to make sure that what I'm doing feels right next to this. Like if someone listened to this and they listened to this, it would be like, yep, that all like makes sense.
Now, are you mastering stuff that Reed mixes
as well?
A
lot of stuff that Reed
So
mixes.
Is that a unique experience to be able to go into the mixer's room and experience what the mixer's intention is?
I also, I assisted Reed for 3.5 years. So I have an extra bit of like knowledge on his specific mixing, but the more important thing, it's less about, to me, the being able to like have access to his room or the mixes themselves, as it is having him being down the hall where I can just be like, hey, Reed, that snare was a little loud in this track. Can you like maybe just pop that down just a little bit? That'll make it a lot better. And he can just do that really fast and get it to me. That kind of relationship is awesome. I wish the mix engineer was next door all the time.
Having been his assistant, his response isn't, hey man, can you go grab me a coffee, please?
No, it's not. Luckily,
Not
he trusts. I'm one of the lucky ones he trusts. So I think he'd probably actually go with my suggestion on that one, which is funny. But
right on.
But yeah.
Let's see. What was I going to ask you about that? So, yeah, I mean, getting to know your speakers by listening and working on them for a long time, it is a thing I have to remind myself of, is to just go down and listen for listening pleasure. Don't
totally.
listen. Because I'm usually in my studio listening to the stuff I'm working on. And I need to remember to listen to other records.
Do you put on music like if you're doing things in the studio, like you're setting up for a session?
Doing something.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't have the ability to do emails and listen to music at the same time.
Oh, okay.
My brain doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So I have to turn off the music when I'm doing that kind of thing. So for me, a listening thing that'd be the only thing I was doing. I would just sit there and listen.
No, that makes sense.
So I have to make time for myself to do that.
That's fair.
But what's cool about what you said about, listen enough time that it's baked into your brain, it just reminds me that like our brains, the study of physiology, our brains are, especially when we were younger, and as we get older, less so, but, really young, like 20s and stuff like that, that's when our brains are still malleable and like the neurons are setting. But like at any point in your life that you're training yourself to do something and learn something, your brain it creates new pathways to
100%.
process that and everything. So it really does make sense to think of training our ears on headphones, on speakers in our rooms as requiring a training
100%
process. And I think a good takeaway too is to remember and remind ourselves there are plenty of things which we can pivot quickly for creative decisions in making music and records. But some things like learning our mixing monitors and learning our reference is something we might want to be cautious about pivoting on very often.
100%. I very, very, very rarely change speakers. From the BMWs, once in the last 10 years have I changed speakers. So yeah.
And have you seen mixers have a similar attitude at all? What about Reed?
Yeah, Reed does. He was on ATCs for the whole time I was with him, and he actually just recently switched to PMC when he switched over to the Atmos room. Yeah. But now he's on those and is just using that.
Yeah.
He does have a couple other small speakers, but they have also remained consistent over the last 10 years.
Well, I think in mixing, the additional small speakers can be really, really valuable.
Yeah. Way more important. Especially because I think, mixing, you are really working on that mid-range and that actual balance between the elements in a mix. And a lot of times, it's the only way to really hear that is on a smaller
And you want to have an idea about like these different listening environments, like across the room, the iPhone speaker, the iPad, the whatever, the 100%. Jam box.
I remember it when I was at Georgetown. Yeah, Reed was actually still doing a lot of his mixing on a boombox. He had like a stereo input that just went into this old crummy boombox, and that was like how he was getting a lot of the balances, which I thought was really clever.
I've done versions of that, and right now I've just got an Avant tone.
Yeah, those are great too.
Hit mono. I've mentioned this before, but I like mentioning it. So I'll mention it again. There are things that I've noticed are huge reveals outside of mixing decisions. Pitch is really easy for me to hear when I go down to mono and quiet.
Interesting.
On the Avant tone. I comp all my vocals that way now.
Huh.
So nothing high fidelity while I'm comping vocals.
Yeah.
I just listen for this low mid-range pitch information.
That's actually one that I recently learned about and had not known, is that pitch is harder to differentiate at higher volume levels. And like one of the reasons why a lot of live recordings singers sound flat is because they're not actually, in their heads, they're not flat.
Right.
And it's not that they sing flat, it's that this is correct to them because it's so loud in this room.
Yeah, exactly. And I just heard that recently on some stage stuff where at the beginning of a song when it was quiet, the singer the pitch was so great, but then once the band started kicking up and I could tell the volume was probably filling up the stage a lot, the pitch started losing its footing a little bit. A reminder to us rock stars when we're working with the singer in the control room and they got the headphones on, the louder the headphones go, there's a good chance that the pitch reference will, I'm not sure, if it always goes flat or sharp or something, but it probably just loses its footing.
Yeah, that's true.
And then I remember learning this years ago was the idea that bass, the louder the bass is, the harder it is to hear the pitch. And I've found myself many times, like in a loud bass environment, listening and being like, "Wait, is that a half?" You can like, I'll lose a whole half step.
Yeah. I know like, exactly what you're talking about.
It's hard to hear the pitch of the note. And people producing hip hop and dance and EDM, where there's like an 808 that's changing pitches to go with the song. One of the first suggestions that they'll make is throw it an octave up to write your bass part. So you're checking your note choice, and this would be MIDI notes.
That makes sense though.
Against the harmony.
Because you really
content.
might just not be able to hear it well.
Right, you just can't hear it. And then drop it way down low, and now it's in the subs.
That's really clever. I've never heard that.
You spot checked it,
I like that.
It's fun stuff. I mean, that's the really fun thing about what we do is just it's so deep. And like, you can just
that's what I like. I like fixing problems. Like I like problem solving and puzzles, and that this just tickles that perfectly. Right? It's all a big problem to solve.
All right, so let me see here. What's your favorite thing about mastering?
Honestly, I think it's going to sound like a little, I don't know, maybe selfish, but like I really like that, or maybe it's going to sound just like boring and like, I don't know, cliche, but it's really fun to work with people and do something for them where they come back to you and are super excited and super stoked at what you did and made whatever their baby is better to them. I just love that feeling. I love getting that email of like, oh, this sounds amazing. Or I even love getting the email of like, we can change one or two things and it'll be perfect. Like, that's great, And it's that sort of like little dopamine hit of it's something that I feel like I'm good at doing. It's something I enjoy doing. And at the same time, I get to make people happy with it. And I think that is a really rare combination of things as a job to do. And to me, that I can't ask for anything more. That's just perfect.
One of my absolute favorite stages of making a record was always attending the mastering session.
Interesting.
Which is a little bit of a disappearing art or a disappearing experience because it's so possible to do that process remotely now and share it back and forth and everything. But back when we were making CDs, we'd take the finished mixes and bring them into the mastering studio. And it was a day I just get to chill on the back couch with really good, hopefully really good coffee. I probably thought really bad coffee was really good coffee back then, but that's all right.
That's funny.
And just hear it on these big speakers. And it was such a pleasure. You know? A lot of those experiences were with Jim DeMaine. Oh,
yeah.
Over at Yes Master. And then also Hank Williams over at
Master Mix. Was that right?
Master Mix, yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Not the hey, good looking.
Wrong Hank Williams.
Wrong Hank Williams, but great mastering engineer. And it was just so much fun, man. And I also felt a little bit like you mother scratchers, and you get to sit there and like, in a half a day to a day, take the record from, this point to this point up here, to all the songs and make everybody feel good. And I'm like, you know how hard we had to work on this stuff to try and get it good at all,
Yeah. It's funny, the pluses and minuses, because we talk about this all the time at the studio with Reed too, but it's like like you said, benefits to mastering, all of those things. But on the flip side, another benefit I would say is that if a project is really a struggle, we only have to live with it for a day, a couple days. It's not going to be a months long, slog. But on the same flip, on the other side of that,
months long,
you never know.
You're being conservative. How about like a year,
couple decade long project?
But how about like, sorry guys, I got to go home and go back to my family. I think I'm out of this record.
It's fair. I have not been to that point yet. But on the flip side too, we don't get to be as it's not as creative as actually digging in there and making the music. And we don't get quite the relationship with the songs and the art that I think other engineers in the process do. So it's a little bit of a give and take. Right. Also, we don't get paid nearly as much for the work. So it's like we got to work on many, many, many more records to, and because we can do them in a day versus, we won't have a project for a month that will generate income. So it's a give and take, I think.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. As a producer and a mixer, somebody seeing the beginning of a song through a mix, I've learned that there are times where I didn't realize what the song was really about until it's done.
Interesting.
Because, obviously I train myself to pay attention to the lyrics now, but there are times where the lyrics, maybe we moved fast, maybe it just wasn't a moment to like really inspect the lyrics. But by the time we get to the finished version, I'll hear it and I'll have this like light bulb as I hear it. Have you noticed that about mastering? Has there ever been times where you go back and listen to a record that you mastered a while ago and all of a sudden the light bulbs are going off about what this record really is?
Not particularly, but I will say that the reason for that is I have the same syndrome, probably more severely. I don't really listen to lyrics. And I don't mean that in a way of like, they're not important or anything like that. It's just that the thing that gets me excited about music is the way that recordings hit my ears and make me physically feel. And there are some songwriters and some songs that I do love for their lyrical content, but I'm usually seeking that out specifically for listening enjoyment. When I'm working, I really don't. I make sure that it's very clear and like, I'm definitely listening to the vocals and the lyrics to make sure that it's all clear and whatever, but my brain is not putting it together into any kind of
English class meaning,
right, exactly. However, what I do still feel is like I will get like a vibe from the lyrics without even really listening to what the specific words are or what specifically they're saying. I'll be like, oh, this is a melancholy whatever type of song. This is a clearly an upbeat, like this is a positive message. And I don't even need to know what the words are, and the music will direct me in that way too. So in this funny way, I kind of have not had that experience with coming back to a song after in that way. However, I wish I could be better. Like, I wish I did more focused listening on songwriting.
Well, it's not like you're going to change the lyric later.
Exactly. Like for a job,
much.
that would just be from like a personal
Isotope hasn't created that module yet.
To change the lyric module?
module.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. But yeah, I don't listen to lyrics. I'm just that much, to be honest, which is, I think that might be kind of typical too for people
well,
that do
I think about different people making records too. And on the one hand, it makes sense to me that there would be a type of person like me, maybe like you, maybe we share this trait of like being drawn to the feeling and the power of the sounds and how it all goes together and how it, works within the confines of the speaker and leaps out and
exactly
all that kind of stuff, where, like we get so focused on things like where's my volume knob at in the car right now when it's sounding like this,
Yes, exactly.
And thank God somebody else is thinking about like the lyrics that go into a song and what the message is, And I don't know if the people who tend to think about the lyrics and the message tend not to think about these other things. But like my mentor at Alex, the great Brad Jones, he was an English, I think he was an English major, literature and everything before going into record making. So he probably was focused on both, so it probably is a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But with the, continuing, and we're going to close out here, but continuing on the humor of Isotope creating a new thing, what do you think the future of music looks like?
That's an interesting one. We didn't even get into the, immersive or any of that. But I think I'm gonna make a bold prediction.
Do it.
Okay, a bold prediction. I'm gonna say that in my audio or my musical future of the universe, I think that record labels are slowly going to die. I think the majors maybe have like a half-life of like 5 years. I'm gonna say 5 to 10 years. I think that music will continue to become easier and easier to make for everyday people as it is now. And that generally has, I think, led to a slight decline of quality in some regards. For example, I was talking to my wife last night. When was the last time you heard a key change in a song? Like, never.
Just the one that I wrote.
Well, of course.
Recently.
So you also make rock music.
Actually, it wasn't a key change. It was just a half step.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but still, like when you listen now to like pop music, I feel like there's never key changes in pop music anymore.
Although I played it I was playing it for Andy Freeman in the car, and he was just like, "Oh, it's like Africa by Toto," and I was like, "Oh man,
that's what the key change is now. Now it's Africa."
I never even liked that song.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, so I think that it'll become easier for people to make music, but I also think that there will be a slight quality decrease that always leads to that. However, there's always people innovating and doing cool things, and I believe, like you were talking about, the AI stuff is going to be used in conjunction with human ingenuity and creativity to make awesome things. That those will be the things that stand out and that we still listen to. I don't think that music is in any sort of danger as an entity. I think the industry has some figuring out to do. I think that there's a lot of money being sort of funneled to the top and taken away from the people actually creating the art. And I think that's going to come to a head as all it takes is one innovative company to somehow come out with a way to distribute music where artists actually make their money and, rich guys in suits don't. And when we can figure that out, it's going to just shift the way that it all works. How? Why? No clue.
Is anybody wearing a suit anymore? I thought everybody was wearing pajamas.
That's true. That's how old. Now I've been in the music industry too long.
All right. So let me go to this closing question. This is hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time, find young Daniel, and say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could? Dun, dun, dun. Here at Podzilla Studios.
Right?
You heard it first.
I think I would go back and tell myself to pursue more options with jobs in audio when I was a little bit younger. I think that I got very excited to have my very first job in a studio. And it wasn't the best situation for me, like from a health standpoint. And
were you like all day, all night in the studio?
Yeah. I was getting run pretty ragged, and
what else were we gonna do? That was fun to do.
It was, but it was.
Occasionally, I want to do it all over again for like 5 minutes.
I definitely don't. But I will say, I think that I thought what I had was something that this was like my one time. This was like this is it. This is you've got the dream. Like you cannot pursue anything else. And so I think I went headlong into focusing on my career in this one specific direction very early on, where I wish I would have just explored more and done, had more options and just talked to more people about opportunities to like have other jobs. I came into this industry very scared. Like I felt very much like, and at the time it was kind of true. You're always on the chopping block. There's always 18 kids coming in behind you out of college who want to do exactly what you do, right?
Yeah.
And are capable.
Well, especially in a big studio setting like Sterling.
Right, exactly.
In New York.
And so it felt very cutthroat, and I was very protective of like me and my place in this little industry, especially at Georgetown. And I wish I had been a little more forgiving or like whatever with myself to like go do some other things, see some other people. Maybe had spent a little less time in the studio, actually, and that's probably not the answer a lot of people give, but I don't feel like I don't regret anything. I don't feel like I missed anything. I just feel like I wish I had pursued a few other things when I was younger. That's all.
Cool. I mean, I think about that. I'm trying to think about my own experience in that context, and I definitely explored some things, but I also spent tons of time in the studio. Yep. And, what did I explore? I don't know. I mean, I learned how to build cables for a company that was selling cables and do some studio installs.
See, that's a cool side. I never even did that. That would have been cool, That's funny. That's interesting.
It's fun. But then at one point you're like, I don't want to do any more soldering. Now I can't even see the solder.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. I've just started soldering a little bit, so I'm figuring it out.
It is fun. It's a craft. There's a Zen craftsmanship to.
There is. I've been building some DIY
stuff in the studio.
I'm building some DIY audio gear, and it's like Legos for adults. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do you have a vision for building your tools in the studio?
I have one in there already.
Do you really?
Yeah,
what'd you build?
I built it's a really cool compressor. It's the DIY-RE. I don't know if you're familiar with this company.
DIY Electronics or whatever.
Yep, yeah. And they build an SSL style one rack. It's basically like a G series compressor, stereo compressor. And it doesn't sound exactly like the SSL one, but it sounds really good. And I have used it it's become my sort of fast, grabby compressor if I ever need that on something. It's wonderful, like 1 to 2 dB of compression, and it just really adds that SSL thump and vibe to stuff.
Right, so it might be cool on live band, or not live, stage.
No, but like
band
music
mixes.
For sure. Yep, band music. It's awesome.
That kick together with the bass a little more. And I
gotta say, I was so proud when it like actually worked. I couldn't believe that and it sounded good. I honestly thought I would just build it for fun and then it would sit in my room or whatever. But I've actually used it on many recordings. It's great.
I've heard so many good stories of DIY building. I've had interns who show up and like their school project was building a mic that literally was like in the XLR connector. It's that big or whatever.
Crazy.
And so my takeaway is I would encourage you rock stars to go for it. Pick a DIY project. If you haven't done it yet, build it. It's gonna work and you're gonna use it and it's gonna be an awesome experience.
Super fun too. It's super fun. Yeah.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us in Recording Studio Rockstars.
Thanks for having me.
Totally awesome to have you here. Let the Rockstars know, where can they go find you? What if they're ready to get their next hit record mastered?
Yeah, awesome. Well, you can find me at infrasonic.sound.com is our website. There's a booking form if you want to book a session, or we've got our contact info there if you just want to hit us up and ask some questions first. I'm also on Instagram at InfrasonicDan. And that's kind of my only social as of right now, but we're going to
Can they call you just to practice pronouncing your name?
Absolutely.
Bacigalupi, over the phone?
Funny enough, my mom was a 4th grade teacher her whole life, and she used to have her last name as a spelling word on a spelling test every week until every class got it right, and some years it never left the spelling test.
Right
so yes, you are more than welcome to come chat with me about my crazy last name.
Awesome. Well, Rockstars, thank you so much for staying with us and hanging and listening, and please drop comments in and let us know any of your thoughts about the stuff you enjoyed hearing about. If you got any questions. And Daniel, look forward to seeing you around your studio, man.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.
Right on. Cheers, man. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're gonna help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.